Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. In today's episode, I'm going to compare and contrast some recent events, and I want to try and look at the honesty, or rather the dishonesty in reporting that we see from the mainstream media, specifically CNN and a host of other of the more supposedly reputable news industries that are out there that people generally watch in the United States, be it your local TV stations or on your cable news networks as well. But specifically, this is the reporting in terms of some of the false narratives that are coming out of these news organizations. And when you specifically compare and contrast the reporting, let's say that has come out of the crisis in Kazakhstan, and then you compare and contrast that verbiage, that message, to the January 6th Capitol protests. So again, let's first look at the word that is often used regarding the January 6th protest in the term insurrection. So when you say the word insurrection, and a lot of the mainstream news channels have started utilizing the term the January 6th insurrection. So, again, let's look at that word insurrection. What does insurrection mean to you? Because insurrection usually means, in terms of just the Webster definition, it is a violent revolt. But with that being said, in the modern context of a insurrection, we think of the use of extreme violence within the context of an insurrection. So when we say insurrection, we think about the United States Civil War, and a lot of some of the mainstream media compares and contrasts the U.S. Civil War with January 6th. And you also get in terms of the utilization of insurrection, you think about the insurrection in Iraq, maybe the insurrection that took place in Chechnya. That is a insurrection where you see the widespread use of firearms, and there is a violence being perpetrated by both sides. And what I mean by that, the extreme use of violence, not a protest, not marching down a street, not occupying a building without the use of extreme violence. And again, extreme violence regarding the term insurrection, which you can associate those two terms, again, that is an insurrection. That is the use of firearms to directly attack or overthrow a government entity. Okay? So for me, that is what at least in my perception, and now that may be a little different for everyone, but generally speaking, when we talk about insurrection, that is what we see. The widespread use of violence by an organization to attempt to overthrow a government or compel a government to change its policies. And again, specifically in regards to insurrection, we generally see the use of firearms or a armed movement, armed insurrectionists. So I hope we can agree on that point. So no matter where you set left, right on this side of the equation, let's agree that a insurrection is that. It is a armed insurrection. So now if we compare and contrast the reporting that was done in Kazakhstan or on the so-called protests that were taking place in Kazakhstan. And please understand this. Obviously, the government that exists in Kazakhstan is a authoritarian government that is heavily backed by the Russian government. And again, I'm not by no means trying to portray the current Kazakh government as a good guy in this. But again, I'm just trying to get to the facts in terms of how reporting is done. Okay, I hope you understand that. So, if you watched the media, again, the U.S. mainstream media, the situation, the crisis that was taking place in Kazakhstan, in Almaty, was considered a protest. It was considered a protest against the rise, initially the rise in gas prices. Now, with that being said, that looked like more of what you would see in terms of an insurrection than what was accurately reported in the January 6th Capitol riot. So what do I mean by that? So in Kazakhstan, they were actively burning the governor's residence, or the governor's building. You saw the former president's home in Almaty burned. You saw a variety of government buildings and institutions burned. You saw the widespread use of firearms by protesters, to include some even quasi-jihadi activity where they were allegedly sawing off the heads of some of these officers or individuals belonging to some of the security forces. So the widespread use of violence in Kazakhstan to achieve the possible overthrow of a government. Now, again, I'm not looking at, is the current Kazakh government a lawful government? Obviously, some people believe it is, other people believe it is not, in terms of it being an authoritarian regime. But again, I'm just looking at the reporting that was done by the U.S. mainstream media in terms of calling what was happening in Kazakhstan a color revolution or a protest. While on the other hand, if we look back at the Capitol protests, where citizens in the United States occupied the Capitol, but again, there was no widespread use of firearms. The only person killed by a firearm was one of the protesters that had entered the Capitol building by security personnel inside of the Capitol building. So there was not the introduction of firearms by protesters. We were not seeing protesters attack and engage law enforcement agents with firearms. We were not seeing improvised explosive devices. We were not seeing the use of extreme violence that you would ordinarily associate with a insurrection, but that's what it's called. So again, this is why the mainstream media in the United States is losing its credibility so very quickly, because it lies. And then you associate that with my recent video about Sotomayor, the Supreme Court justice, talking about 100,000 children, and many of whom were placed on ventilators because of COVID-19. That is false. So again, this is the realm that we are now living in, where you have both the media lying, and you have, I would say, individuals in terms of the U.S. Supreme Court that have to have the highest levels of integrity lying as well. Now we could say, oh, well, maybe she misspoke, or maybe she, for whatever reason, she's older and is having a Joe Biden moment. Well, I'm sorry, that's just not going to cut it out. That's just not going to cut it. You are a Supreme Court justice making a public statement. You cannot misspeak about such an important topic, such as misquoting 100,000 children sick in the hospital on ventilators with COVID. That's reprehensible. And whether it was a faux pas, a misspeak, or an outright lie to obtain a political goal, which I believe it was, you can't do that. But yet it's being done. And then again, the reporting, by media outlets that state that they are reporting the truth, and it's not the truth. It is simply not the truth. And especially when you're using terms like insurrection over here, reference to January 6th, no matter where you said, again, on the political side of the equation, it was not an insurrection. It was not an attempted violent overthrow of a government. And there was not the use of firearms. It was not the use of intense violence associated with an insurrection. I would say the summer of violence before that by Antifa was much more intense in terms of violent activity, and that was never called an insurrection. Kazakhstan probably looked more like a true insurrection. Again, not taking sides with reference to the Kazakh government, but again, the level of violence and the intensity of violence was much more associated with an actual insurrection, but it was labeled a protest. Why? Well, because they're trying to establish goals, and they're trying to establish a false narrative around those goals. For whatever reason, that's what's occurring. But again, just wanted to talk about that. And again, just the the level of dishonesty, whether it's coming from not politicians, but Supreme Court justices, and then just the mainstream media in terms of the verbiage that they're using on identifying different things that are happening around the world. On one hand, the January 6th protest, which it's what it was a protest. It's not the first time the Capitol has been occupied, or there has been a protest in the Capitol building. Not the first time, but again, according to the mainstream media, it was, but it wasn't. And again, associate that with the reporting of what happened in Kazakhstan. Well, I think you get the point. Have a good day, everybody.